Chapter 30 Secrets Revealed. It seemed to Beth that she was sending up more than her fair share of prayers in the days that followed her sister's arrival in the settlement, but she guessed not, since the Lord was taking time to answer them all. Oh, it was good to be back. She smiled at the word, admittedly leaning. Everything was going to right up, just as Mrs. Malone had promised. She could hardly wait until Thanksgiving to tell her friend about her countless blessings. She, Vanjie, Wilson, and Joe had been so busy with living that, as Joe put it, it left no time for visiting. Of course, what the four of them shared was hardly visiting. She struggled for hours for a more fitting word. It was more like, well, she was back to that word again, living, and what on earth would the valley folk think she meant by that? She hardly knew herself what to make of the new relationship, let alone explain it to another. She had better do some thinking before they joined the crowd that Mrs. Malone and O'Higgin had invited to turn around in for a holiday feast. She and Vanjie had to move into the cabin, but details? Well, there would be some details she would keep to herself. They belonged to her and Vanjie. That wasn't quite true either, she was forced to admit. To her surprise, the two men of the new foursome knew the details she had hoped to keep secret. Even now, she wasn't sure, after the initial shock, if she was angry, embarrassed, or pleased. At least she was relieved to know that anything the four of them shared would go no further. There would have been no way to hold some of it back anyway. Beth pushed away from her desk and laid aside the paper she was grading to glance about the classroom. The children had filled the four corners with piles of cornstalks and fat pumpkins. The cornucopia, a real goat's horn brought in by Nate Goldsmith instead of the wicker one she had back home, overflowed with pine cones, mellow fruit, and golden ears of corn. Truly, there was abundant life here, just another of the many things she would be praising the Creator for again come the day after tomorrow. Scoring the papers could wait. The boys and girls were doing so very well, some of them excelling, and over the 4-day recess the men of the settlement were planning to floor the building. Oh, how wonderful! But for now she needed to think. Thinking time was hard to find, either at the cabin or at the big North House. Not that she minded. Maybe that was the problem. She didn't mind at all. Where was it all leading? How could she stop it? Or, she bit her lip in concentration, did she want to? She supposed that it was she who unwittingly laid the foundation for the friendships which might be going beyond the usual definition of the word. Both men had befriended her in a grave time of need, and though they were different from each other, she was attracted to them both. The perplexing part of it was that her feelings toward Joe and Wilson were as different as the two men were from each other. How could a woman possibly be thinking like this when she wasn't a candidate for love anyway? With a burning face, Beth returned to her work. The paper suddenly seemed important after all. The trouble was that she was unable to concentrate. Scraps of conversations kept coming back. Wilson figures the baby will be here toward the end of April, Vanjie had said as matter-of-factly as if announcing the arrival of spring. He knows? You mean the exact date? Of course he knows there's going to be a baby. Something of the old light-hearted Vanjie came back. He knew the first day. But of course he would have. Beth felt foolish. Does he know? She let the question hang, hardly knowing how to phrase it. Who the father is? Vanjie shook her head. It doesn't matter, but he knows that I'm not married, yes. Another time when the two of them had talked, Beth asked what she should tell people. I sound like Mama, she thought, and was disturbed at the likeness. Still, she did have to know what course of action to follow. The situation wasn't exactly ideal. Vanjie had laughed. They'll know before too long, she promised. Then, sobering, she added, about the name, I'll just use my own. I guess it's good. We're half-sisters, though I often wish we had had the same father. Beth had wished the same many times, but now was not one of them. The different surnames did offer a measure of protection for the unborn child. Then she began to realize that the baby's arrival would extend their family. Why, she would be an aunt. At one time the thought would have been unsavory, but now it was more than bearable. It was as sweet as honeycomb. She wondered what color eyes the baby would have, and hair. Would it be a boy or girl? Waiting must be hard for Vanjie. She could hardly wait herself. Crispeth again laid down her pencil. She was remembering something else. It was even more disturbing because it involved a secret all her own. Does Wilson intend telling Joe? I mean the details? Vanjie looked surprised, and in her usual candid, naive, really manner, responded, Oh, I told him myself when we had to wait in Reading. Vanjie, you didn't tell him about you? He knew already, except that it was the same man. The first part should have come as no surprise. She had been feverish on the stagecoach, and he had been kind. But John's betrayal, oh, the shame. Crispeth's reflections were interrupted by a faint rustling in the hazelnut bushes. Almost simultaneously the door opened soundlessly. Boston Buck stepped inside. Several times Crispeth had thought she caught sight of the young Indian's head bobbing in and out of the thicket surrounding the school building. Hoping it was her imagination, she had tried to dismiss any worry that his presence might have caused. Automatically her eyes went to her bag. The brooch was still there. Each day she had planned to wrap it here in privacy, and now, even as she faced possible danger, a part of her was thinking ahead. There would be nobody to whom she could return it. The Indian approached cautiously. Then, as she wondered what to do, he pulled from behind him an enormous, beautifully feathered wild turkey. Such a flood of surprise and relief flowed over her that for a moment Crispeth was sure she would burst into tears, but that was the last thing she wanted to do. The gift deserved some dignity. Thank you, Boston Buck, she said, bowing humbly. Then, taking a shimmering feather from the tail of the bird, she tucked it into her hair. Whoever said Indians never smiled certainly had never met this one. A smile creased the dark face, revealing a set of perfect teeth. He moved forward, took a brilliant feather from the turkey's tail, and stuck it in his headband. Name Boston Buck, he said, and then he was gone.